Hello, everybody, and welcome to our fifth monthly NOFA Mask webinar. This webinar is presented by Ben Hartman of Claybottom Farm in Goshen, Indiana, and author of the book The Lean Farm. My name is Brittany Overshiner, and I'm the Beginning Farmer Program Coordinator for NOFA Mask. My email is brittany@nofamask.org. Feel free to contact me with feedback or questions about this webinar. Before we start tonight, I would like to thank our sponsors, Frontier Natural Products, Lancaster Agriculture, and UMass Risk Management and Crop Insurance Education Program for supporting the production of this series. I'd also like to thank New Entry Sustainable Farming Project and Tufts Friedman School of Nutritional Science and Policy for providing access to the WebEx software we are using to host the workshop. Many, many thanks to the NOFA Mask staff and board who have helped make this workshop possible. If you're not a member of NOFA Mask, please consider joining to support our education and policy work. Visit our website, nofamask.org, to learn more. The format tonight, we'll start with a 45-minute presentation. There'll be questions to follow. You can use the chat function if you're joining us online to type in a question. We are going to hold the questions until the end. If you look at your screen, here's a little image to help. There's a little chat icon right above the video of Ben, which you guys can see now. If you click the chat, you can type in a message like I'm going to do right now, which is hello, which goes to everybody. You can also select to send me a private message if you like, if you have a question about how to use the WebEx software, or if you just have any feedback you'd like to give. All right, I think we're going to get started. We are going to be using a slightly different format just so everybody knows. Ben's going to be sharing his screen because he has an awesome, huge PowerPoint for us to share. I'm going to make him the presenter and he shares his screen, but bear with us while we use this slightly different format. Ben, I am making you the presenter, and it's good to go.
Okay. Okay, how does it look on your end?
It looks great.
Okay, and I can hear you, so I'm just going to jump right in here. Thanks, Brittany, and thanks to each of you for taking some precious time out of, I'm sure, your busy work schedules. We tend to think that things like burnout and chaos are problems just of vegetable production and just on farms. And in actuality, all types of businesses have these problems. And the lean system, which is essentially a system to ruthlessly eliminate waste as a way to restore order and to generate profits, is a system that applies in all types of settings. And so it was begun on assembly lines, specifically at Toyota. However, now it's in use in hospitals, schools, and farms, all kinds of places. And the best analogy I can give is that it's like an extra gear. It's an organizational system that's like a slingshot for small farms that can give you an extra competitive edge, and it doesn't cost a lot of money. In fact, a lot of times we spent probably $500 or less on some organizational knickknacks, but other than that, it really doesn't cost money. It's a process improvement system. And so I'm going to jump right in to say that Lean began after World War II in Japan. And specifically at Toyota, they had a bombed out factory. There were no stable supplier base. They had very little capital and a limited market for vehicles in Japan. And then in the U.S., we won the war. Our factories were just going gangbusters, and that's what they had to compete against. And so they created what they call this Toyota production system. It's now called the Lean system. And the idea here was to catch the U.S. in productivity within 3 years, and doing it without large capital investments. And so once again, we see that necessity is the mother of invention. And what happened was they did it very quickly. Within a short amount of time, Toyota became 3.8 times more profitable than its competitors. And so it was doing something right. And it's the reason that places like Massachusetts Institute of Technology, University of Michigan, and all kinds of institutions have started noticing and studying Toyota and asking what are the principles they're using and what that they're doing could be made applicable to other types of businesses. Anyhow, so what we have done, in a sense, is graph Toyota's business business model onto our tiny farm. And so I'm going to only give you a brief rundown of who we are. This is my wife, Rachel. I'm Ben, our son Arlo here, and we just had another son, Leander, 2 months ago. We're a 5-acre farm. We just have less than 1 acre in production. Zone 5B, 4 greenhouses, and we're in our 10th year of operation. I'm doing this full time. Rachel's a 6th time, and Arlo's a 10th time. And Leander, he's probably in the negative. He's not sure he's leaning up the place, but it's a lot of fun having kids. And we've got 2 part-time employees. We do have this local commitment, so it's such that 90% of our food ends up on plates within 10 miles of the farm, and it wouldn't have to be that way. We certainly could drive our food to Chicago, Kalamazoo, some other stronger markets with higher prices. However, this is a choice we're making, and I say this because one fear is that you could use lean to erase your core values. And I think that you can use lean to enhance your core values, to meet your goals more efficiently. And lean doesn't have to strip your ethics. And we currently have around 30 crops, mostly greens and tomatoes, and we don't do big stuff. No watermelons, butternuts, squashes, and that sort of thing. We sell to artisan restaurants, CSA, wholesale, you know what the business is. And we especially are tapping into new local food economy. And what I define this would be, or some defining markets here would be institutional CSAs. For instance, we are partnering with a group of other farms to sell to Goshen Hospital employees, so they can pick up CSA boxes on their way home from work on Fridays. We drop CSA boxes off at a grocery store, our natural foods grocery store here in town, so that people can do other grocery shopping at the same time. And so, in other words, these kind of creative partnerships with institutions to make our product more convenient. And then we do work 40 hours or less. It was definitely not always that way. And we do earn a comfortable living for our family. In our story pre-lean, I grew up on a corn, soybean, cattle farm. I have degrees in English and philosophy, and so those do not really go well together. However, I'm making it work here. I wrote a book, and I speak English on a daily basis, and you'll hear plenty of philosophy here. And then Rachel grew up with a giant garden in Goshen, always did a lot of canning, and we began our life together by purchasing this dilapidated house. We flipped this house to help pay for our farm. Next to this house was a Claybottom tennis court. This would have been a high-end Chicago resort type of house. And it was just in terribly run-down condition. And what we did was we tilled in that Claybottom tennis court. We were living in town. We started out as an urban farm, and we grew food. And we started a 10-member CSA. We went to a weekly farmers market, and we made about $3,000 or $4,000 that first year. Not much, but enough to whet our appetites. And here's a picture of that tennis court. So if you play tennis, I apologize. I know Claybottom tennis courts are not something to take a tiller to. And so eventually we took the leap. We purchased this 5-acre beautiful Amish dairy farm. And here's an overhead view. We've got 4 greenhouses and a small amount of production behind those greenhouses. The greenhouses cover about 9,000 square feet. And that first year, we didn't farm. I'd worked on enough other farms. I worked for about 4 years on a microgreens farm up in southern Michigan. I grew microgreens and baby greens for high-end Chicago restaurants. And I knew enough working on these other farms, I kind of knew how I wanted to set the place up. And so that first year, we ran drain tiles, irrigation, fences, processing room, built a greenhouse, and did no farming. And those first couple of years were really, really tough. We worked really, really hard. And I mean like 60, 70, 80 hours a week. Our production system was low tech. It was backbreaking. We basically used the Elliott Coleman system, these 30-inch beds. We bought all the fancy European hand tools. And we were making it, and we were profitable, but we were tired. And we were getting noticed. And even newspapers were writing articles about us. Our product was improving. However, we mostly had a shotgun approach to our business. In other words, what did we feel like growing? And let's grow it and see who wants it. And so it's really they call it push production. We really grew a lot and then pushed it on to the public just to see what would happen. Okay, so let's get back to lean. Here's how Toyota did it. It's a very simple 4-point system. Number one is to get really, really organized with 5S. And I've come to think that your success in farming is almost equivalent to your ability to get organized. And it's a pretty simple system. I'll get into details here in a minute. Number two is precisely identify value. And you get this information from your customers. In other words, what are they valuing? And an analogy would be when Toyota designed the 2005 Toyota Sienna, they sent an engineer over to the U.S., and he drove minivans in all parts of North America, Mexico, U.S., and Canada. And what he did was he observed how people over here use their vehicles. And what he noticed is for instance, we drive long distances here compared to in Japan. And so he's the one that came up with this idea of a flip-up tray to set our hamburgers and cup holders and that sort of thing. He also went to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and he went to a Home Depot, and he stood in the parking lot. He didn't go in. And he wanted to see how what they were loading into their vans. And he noticed that Americans were very do-it-yourself obsessed type of culture. And so all these weekend warriors were coming out with their 4x8 sheets of plywood, and they're trying really, really hard to stuff them into their vans. And so they'd leave the back hatch halfway open or use bungees. They'd try to strap it to the roof. And what he saw was a lot of frustration. And so apparently what he did was he whipped out his cell phone right there in the parking lot. He called home, and he said, in the next van that we produce, you're going to be able to get a 4x8 sheet of whatever in it. And so now it's standard. Basically, any van you purchase, you can get a 4x8 sheet of plywood in it, and it's going to have at least 1 or 2 flip-up trays and a billion cup holders. Number 3 is cut out the muda. And muda is a term that it roughly translated means waste. And essentially anything you're doing that isn't in the service of adding value. Number 4 is practice Kaizen or continuous improvement. So let's look a little deeper into these. First, here's the nutshell of what this system is. Ticcione developed the lean system. He said, all we're doing is looking at the timeline from the moment the customer gives us an order to the point when we collect the cash. So think of a linear timeline here. And we're reducing that timeline. We're compressing that timeline by removing the non-value added waste. And essentially that's what we've done on our farm. I'm going to skip a slide here so we can keep moving. Number 1, we got decluttered. And we did this pretty quick. Using this nifty 5S system here. And essentially, we went to a factory using this system, and we noticed they had these mobile workstations, and these stations moved around with the workers. Workers weren't trudging back and forth between their workstations and a central tool storage area. They always had what they needed on hand. And they always had only what they needed on hand. And so the first thing we did was sort. We got rid of anything not used on a daily basis or almost every day for adding value. And essentially the way this worked was we had, like all farms, a huge, terribly disorganized, I shouldn't say like all farms, like many, disorganized centralized tool storage area. And we went through and we touched every item in there, and we asked that item, how did you add value for us last year, or for our customers last year? And if we sat there and struggled to come up with an answer, we chucked the tool. And we aim for simplicity. How can we find the fewest tools to get the most work done around here? What are the best of tools on our farm? And what if we got rid of everything else? And then we apply this rule: don't squirrel. We have to physically remove it from the property. You're not allowed to designate rooms where you just throw things that you might someday use. And so we did, if you have to squirrel, and I admit we had to a little, we couldn't just immediately get rid of some of these things. And so what we did is recreate what we call a red tag holding room, and we put questionables in there. And twice a year in our area, there's a produce equipment auction. And if we haven't used that tool by the time the auction rolls around, we'll send it to the auction. And so that gives us 3 or 4 months to change our minds. anyhow, the point is to get, if you're not using it, get it off the property. Here's a couple before and a couple after pictures. And so you see the picture on the left, we kept those curved grape shears and these ubiquitous produce knives that we harvest our greens and a lot of other vegetables with, and kept our favorite hose. And you're looking at our tools. We don't have more than this, what's in this picture. And then we have a small shed. We keep our tractor and the row covers, which we keep organized according to how many holes are in them, basically whether they're first or seconds. And, really, and then we keep a small BCS. And really, what more do you need? And so number 2 is setting in order. And we spread tools out around the property close to where we needed them. And so if you come to our farm, you'll see hooks and magnets and this sort of thing hanging at eye level all over the property. And so what we wanted to use was what the 10-year-old test would essentially, a 10-year-old should be able to come onto your farm and find a shovel or a hoe or whatever you ask that 10-year-old to retrieve, because it's just that obvious where you store your tools. And this is our son Arlo here, and we like to use the 2-year-old test. And he think he has about enough language capacity he can. But I just say by the end of 2 years old, we're going to see if we can't make this work with him. And so on the left, you see we hung some tools at his eye level, because eye level is a relative term here. Okay, the next is shine. This means is to clean with a toothbrush. And apparently, some of these automobile factories at Toyota look more like hospitals than they do like the factories we're used to seeing here. And what you want to do is make sure the spaces are well lit. And the idea here is to see. It's not to make your farm pretty. You want to notice when waste is creeping into your system. And in a minute here, I'll give a definition of what those types of waste are. And so some quick before and after pictures. This was our indoor processing area here. And there's an after picture. We hung a bunch of lights. We painted all the surfaces. And so it's a very well lit, very comfortable working area. And I'm going to skip these last 2 steps. But I do want to show you this picture of our outdoor hosing area and show you a couple improvements we made. Number 1, we took the legs off of our tables. We noticed that we were spending a lot of time sweeping around the legs. And so that saves, 5 minutes a week, 5 or 10 minutes a week. However, as the weeks and years pile up, that eventually amounts to a lot of free capacity, a lot of time and energy that we free up that we can be using to grow food for our customers, to do things that our customers actually value. We used to have lots of different types of harvesting containers, and I know every farmer probably has their preferences. And we found it was just confusing and not really fair to the new workers on our farm to have to learn our unique preferences. And so what we did was we chose 2 types of containers. One would be these 14-gallon Rubbermaid totes, and they have a lifetime warranty, and we can get them from a store locally. And so we can get more as we need them. And then these bulb crates, which come from Holland, Michigan, and we can, they're very economical and excellent for harvesting our root vegetables in. And so really these are the only 2. And then we'd have some buckets we do harvest tomatoes in. However, we try to keep a small number of tools, and supplies on property as we need. A small number that accomplishes a lot. Oh, and then I wanted to point out here that worker comfort it's a misconception that lean is just about doing things faster and working harder. It's actually about making your work more comfortable too. And so you'll notice here we have these roll-up curtains, and if we get a lot of wind and some cold and nasty weather, we can work this is a south-facing processing area, get nice and toasty in here and be a comfortable hosing area. Okay, we're going to skip a couple slides here. As I want to talk about identifying customer value, because this is really at the heart of the system. Number 1, you want to be scientific. And what this means is lock your own assumptions into a box and throw away the key, throw a bunch of duct tape around it, and stop guessing. And in other words, you want to rely on actual data. Be that parking lot observer and go see your customers and how are they using your food. And so several times a year, we're going to send surveys to our CSA customers We'll conduct person-to-person interviews. We love it when you see point number 2, when we can really get close and personal and watch them eat. And so if a chef invites us to eat in the restaurant, we definitely take him up on that offer, not just because it's a free meal, but we can see what else is on their menu and see how they're using our items and really pick their brains about how we can be pleasing them more. And same with our CSA customers. We love it when they invite us over for dinner. We can watch them unpack their CSA box, watch how frustrating it is to stuff a huge head of lettuce in the refrigerator, for instance. We pick up all kinds of tips, and the point is you want to structure your business around your learnings from what your customers are telling you that they value. And I'll give you another example. Is we created a tomato sticky note that's made us tens of thousands of dollars. And all it is our accounts on one side, and then we list next to each account what type of tomato they like. And so, for instance, if we deliver to a grocery store, they're often going to want more of an orange tomato, one just slightly underripe, because it's going to sit on the shelf and it's not going to be eaten by a customer, maybe perhaps for a week after we deliver it. On the other hand, we have a bar that we deliver to, and I just delivered a 20-pound box of tomatoes to them this afternoon, and they like big red beefsteak hamburger tomatoes. And so next to their name, we'll write 4-inch or greater diameter tomato, fully ripe. In other words, this tomato sticky note has specific types of tomatoes that these customers are wanting, and it's the reason we were able to keep these customers. Because I don't know how it is in your area, but it's getting more challenging, not easier every year. There's more and more competition every year. There's a lot more people, a lot more growers, and there's a lot of places these restaurants could be getting their tomatoes from. And if we take that extra little baby step and really respect what they value, it puts us ahead of our competition, and we can keep these customers. And so I want you to look at the 3 middle boxes here, because those are the most important questions you're going to have to answer for your business. And that's, what do your customers want? Number 2, when do they want it? And number 3, what's the amount they want? And if you can answer those questions with the level of precision, the more precise I'll put it this way, the more precise you are, the more profitable you're going to be. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. We noticed that our customers wanted tomatoes very early in the year, and they want greens in winter. And it's getting more and more difficult to sell zucchinis in July. And so what we've done is we've restructured our business, so we're focusing on specialty crops, getting tomatoes and colored peppers to our customers as early in the year as possible. And so we really put our best energy into getting May and June tomatoes, and our best energy into January and February greens, because that's where the profits are highest, and that answers that middle question. That's when our customers told us they want our food, and so we're going to respect and let their wishes guide our business. Okay, so we have even surveyed our customers to determine their preferred communication method. And I don't know if you sell the restaurants in a number of different accounts, it's annoying, isn't it, to have to get hold of all of them. And I used to think of this as a detraction to our businesses, dragging down our business. And we had a lean consultant come on to the farm, and he basically lectured me and said, no, that is part of your product. Your communication is as much a part of your product as the redness of your tomato. And I have a voice condition actually called spasmodic dysphonia, and it'll cut my vocal cords off. And I thought, I'm going to get into farming because here's a profession where I won't have to talk. And you can see how well that's turned out for me. The point is that without talking to your customers, it's like trying to drive a vehicle without looking at the road. Your customer is the engine and you're the caboose. They need to pull you along. Okay, I think I've honed in enough on that. We're going to go to the next point here. So we'd applied 5S. We got ourselves halfway organized. We'd figured out what our customers valued, and now what? It was time to get rid of the waste. And essentially what you're trying to do is create smooth flow. And I love this analogy. Like, imagine a river flowing through your farm. And are there bicycles in the river? Are there rocks in the river? Is there junk and debris in the river? And waste is like an impediment in a river, and the more waste you can remove, the smoother your product is going to flow through your farm, and the quicker it's going to flow through your farm. And so you want to deliver and produce and deliver value with as few interruptions as possible. And what this has, the end result is you shorten the timeline. And I can hear the questions now. People say, hey, a tomato needs it's just so much time. It needs 85 days or whatever to ripen. You can't shorten that timeline unless you get into genetic modification and things that we don't want to do. And I say that's true. However, there are many, many steps before the seed goes in the ground, and many steps at harvest and post-harvest that can be compressed. And actually, during the production time of that tomato, there's also a lot of wasted motion. And so we're going to look at some specifics here. So there are 10 specific types of muda or waste, and we keep this list at the center of our farm. And if you got a pencil and want to write these down, I encourage you to remember them, to think about them on a daily basis, and to tell workers on your farm that if they see a type of waste, you want them to tell you. Because the point is everyone should work together to get rid of these. Number one, and the most insidious here is overproduction. And the reason is by the time you've taken a product to market, you've got a lot invested in it. And so anything you can do to get rid of overproduction waste is going to really boost your profits. Now, if you have time, I can show you some tricks that we use. Number two is weighting waste. It's when you ask, when are people and products sitting around, and how can we get rid of that type of waste? Third type of waste is transportation. You're driving too much, too many holding places. And a rule that we finally set for ourselves is if we're doing a marketing activity, meaning we're taking our produce off the farm and sitting at a farmer's market or delivering CSA boxes or delivering to restaurants, we should be moving $100 an hour of product because that's what's realistic for us. That number could be higher or lower. It doesn't really matter. But the point is to say, hey, when are we driving? When can we consolidate deliveries? When can we compress our energy? Next will be overprocessing. And I think a lot of small farms do this. An example that we did, we used to put a fancy label on all of our salad mix, and the label had our logo, full color picture on it, and listed everything in it. And we realized once we took off that label, our product sold just as fast. So we were over processing, spending too much time and money on fancy packaging that we didn't need. Too much inventory, having too many seeds on hand would be one example for us. And at this point, we don't put in one seed order at the beginning of the year. I'm probably ordering seeds at least once, often twice or three times a month. Motion waste could people or produce move around less, and we'll get into these ones in bold more specifically. Then overburdening is my favorite type of waste. And basically, you ask yourself at the end of the year, when did I hurt the most? And you want to get rid of those types of hurt. And uneven production and unused talent. My book goes into specifics on all these. We're just going to touch the surface on a couple of them here in the last 15 minutes. So there are three types of activity on your farm. You're either adding value, or let's start with type 1 muda. There are two types of waste. Number one is waste activities that don't add value, but they might be needed. Think about taxes or lead conferences, even this type of talk here. Maybe you have to do them. Maybe they're going to add a ton of value for you. However, be realistic. Your customer's you're not going to get a check in the mail after you spent 2 hours leafing through a seed catalog, for instance, or doing your taxes. Maybe you had to do these things. However, they're not part of adding value, so you need to think about ways of compressing them. Next would be pure muda, pure waste. And many of these we've just talked about, defective products, motion, looking for tools, materials on hand, that sort of thing. And then last is value adding. And when are you doing something that your customer is paying you to do? And another way to say it is, when are you performing a direct action on an object causing the value of that object to go up? And so for us, this would be putting a seed in the ground. When we harvest, we add a ton of value. Our carrots are worth 5 times as much after we take this simple motion of pulling them. And when we wash them, we probably double their value again. And the different types of displays and delivery, and all these things are, we're touching our food and we're causing the value to go up. And those activities should be the focus of your farm. These are some pictures of how they apply this system in Denmark, and my book tells you about what's going on here. We're going to move ahead so I want to leave plenty of time for your questions. So here's some examples of waste elimination at our farm. And I want to give a caveat here that wastes are unique in every context. And what I mean is every business, every farm has those 10 types of waste. And we've been at this system for several years now, and each of those types of waste are very much still a part of our farm. In fact, I can think through my day today. Got up and began our harvest at 7, and I can name for you different types of waste that keep creeping back into our system. And so every farm is unique, every context is unique, and the point is to find your own waste. And so hopefully you'll get some inspiration here, but don't feel like I'm telling you to go home and do exactly what we're doing here, because your wastes are different than mine. Okay, so motion waste. The idea here is to ask yourself, when are you touching your food, and then stop touching it so much. And we at the beginning were touching our food way too much. And for instance, I'll tell you how we harvested head lettuce. We would harvest 50, 100 heads. We put them in a large bin. We cart them up to the processing area. We touch every head as we unload, and someone would peel off the leaves. And then they touch the head again and hand it off to someone else who'd hose it. And then they touch the head again to someone else who put a rubber band around it. And then they touch the head again to someone else who ties a bag or puts a bag around it and boxes it. And you get the picture here. The head of lettuce could be touched 10 times or more by the time it left our property. And so we really diagrammed our motions and tried to stop touching our food. And so with the head of lettuce, we'll now do all those steps I just mentioned, usually out in the field, as long as it's not too hot. We'll harvest, we'll take off the bad leaves, we'll dunk it in a 5-gallon bucket, we'll put plastic around it, and put it in the customer-ready container at the point of harvest. And another way of wording this is harvest as market-ready as possible. Don't harvest, put it in an intermediate location, and finish up your post-harvest activity. Just get her done. Another thing you can do is a spaghetti diagram, and essentially have someone stand at a corner of your property, maybe put them up on a ladder or something, and watch you move for an hour, and have them trace each movement with a pencil on a piece of paper. And it's really they call these spaghetti diagrams because when someone did it on our farm, it looked like a big plate of spaghetti noodles. And the point is, how can we straighten out these noodles? And so you're looking at our processing area, and based on what we learned, we redesigned our processing area. And I already showed you a picture here. Here's a spaghetti diagram. See, this is a factory, aluminum trailer company. We also diagrammed a spaghetti diagram on our field preparation. And so we had a pretty traditional field prep operation, did cover crops, crop rotation. Like I said, I grew up on a corn farm in Indiana, and I love to drive tractors. That's what we do in Indiana. However, driving tractors does not always add value. It's fun to do, but realistically, it's often a waste of time. And so cover cropping is also very costly. It takes a lot of time to plant, a lot of time to turn it in. You lose a lot of time in the field, and that crop is taking up valuable room. They could be growing something. And then seed costs are pretty high on a lot of cover crops. And so the question we asked, could we reduce our passes, reduce our costs? And here's the system we came up with. We covered our entire property with 8 to 12 inches of compost. And like I said, we're less than 1 acre, so it's a doable proposition. And we created about 100 semi-permanent raised beds. And we have this amazing amount of organic matter. And so there's some before and after pictures. We used to drive the tractor around. It's a lot of fun. The Kubotas are a lot of fun. And then this is now how we're doing it. And I took this is a process we did just a couple of weeks ago here. So you can see how we're doing this. We have a truck deliver a lot of chunky compost, and we spread 12 inch, or probably 8, 12 inches. And then I got a chisel plow here. I'll work it, till that compost, help break it up. We throw these tarps on it. And I don't in general recommend the tarps unless you absolutely feel like you're going to have a lot of weeds to take care of, or you absolutely need them. They're really a pain. And if you are going to use them, I'd say 30 feet by 30 feet is the maximum size. They're hard to use if they get much larger than this. However, they're handy in the right situation. It's an old Mennonite Mennonite technique. You know, I grew up Mennonite, and because we had all these silage tarps laying around, we'd use them. And then Jean-Martin Fortier, blank on the name, or the Market Farmer book talks more in depth about how they also did this in France, apparently. So it's an old practice, but it can be handy, and I'm going to skip over it. But anyhow, so this is us covering this because I was worried there's a new compost supplier. I didn't know what type of weed population we're going to have. And then once those tarps come off, our beds are ready. And sometimes I'll get the tractor in bed shape if I have to, in spring and in fall. If I don't have to, the tractor sits. And in midsummer, we don't have the need for raised shaped beds as much as we do in spring and fall when we have a ton of rain often. And then what I'll do is get out the paper pot transplanter, and we'll fill. Here we're filling probably an eighth of an acre in probably less than 2 hours. A very efficient tool. So here are some pros of this system. Our soil is always very loose. Fertility management is very quick. It's very quick to flip beds. We can. You're looking at a picture here. There's the fourth crop in the same holes. We'll just pull the heads and pop some new plugs in. And it's a simple system too. We used to use a lot of granular amendments, liquid fertilizers, and soil tests and that sort of thing. And with this system, we have plenty of fertility that we can go for several years. I'm just going to let you look at some intercropping pictures, and in the interest of time, I'm going to skip over some. I don't use complex field maps, and I think to spend your entire winter making maps is a waste. And in reality, we do our mapping as the season goes on. And essentially, the way this works is when a bed opens up, we replenish. And the term in lean is Kanban. We call that a Kanban signal. And so we try to keep the farm at full capacity all year. And that doesn't happen in the middle of winter, but for most of the year, we're at full capacity. We have something in every square inch. And when a plot opens up, the question we ask is, what could we put in that our customers would value the most 3-4 months from now, or whenever that crop is ready to harvest? And this keeps our farm very flexible too, because a large portion of our business is now selling to this very volatile restaurant industry, these new microbreweries and artisan restaurants are always changing chefs and changing menus, and this helps us stay flexible with that changing marketplace. And so here's another example. A crop came out, then we'll maybe throw some compost on if we need, and broad fork, and new crop goes in. Okay, so I'm going to skip over defect waste to tell you about our transplanting system. And actually, we use transplanting to get rid of a lot of defect, because we notice it's with direct seeding that we are often notice the most defect waste in our product. Seeds wouldn't germinate because the weather took a sudden turn, or insects seem to attack crops in those first 2 to 3 weeks. And if we could keep them in a controlled environment for longer than usually, we're better off. Anyhow, so we've now moved to where we're transplanting basically everything, and even beets, turnips, spinach, Asian greens. And you can use the 72 cell trays, put 4 to 6 seeds per cell, and get these crops out. And they're going to be very healthy after 3 to 4 weeks, and they're only going to need a couple weeks to finish. And it's an added investment in time at the beginning. However, if you can do multi-cell plugs, it really isn't that much more time, and your crop comes out higher quality in the end. And almost everything except for tomatoes, peppers, and eggplants, we do at about a 10 by 10 inch spacing. And I should say we did this before we got our paper pot transplanter, and now we paper pot most of these. But we use that standard system to mark out our rows. And here's an example of some Mizunas, and I think that's Tokyo Bacana. And here those crops are a couple weeks later. And root crops do grow away from one another quite well. Here's some Hakurai turnips with about 4 seeds per cell. If you want to know more about that paper pot system, I'll spend the last couple of minutes show you a couple of slides. You dump your seeds in here. When those plates line up, the seeds drop, and And so in less than a minute, you can see up about 266 seeds. And let's see, these would be Hawkeye turnips going in with the paper pot transplanter. Here my son's helping me transplant carrots. Carrots are still a bit experimental. I've had about 80% success. And the key seems to be transplanting them when the carrot is very small. And these are actually too large here. And we just had a ton of rain and I couldn't get them out. However, ideally, you plant them just at the point of true leaf. And this is true for everything I'm paper potting. I don't think of it as transplanting. I think of it as direct seeding sprouted seeds. So an advantage is you get that perfect spacing and you eliminate the motion waste of thinning. So these were direct seeded and these were paper potted. And you notice the paper pot carrots are not as straight. And I'm a perfectionist, so that kind of bothers me. However, it doesn't seem to bother our customers. These sold very quickly. This was taken a month ago, I think. No, this would have been probably early April here. And so these were transplanted, and we got crops to market very early in the year. We couldn't have if we'd have been direct seeding. I thought the salad mix in the background was paper potted, and then the salad mix in the foreground here was direct seeded. And you notice the difference. The paper potted salad mix is really taken off, in part because you're transplanting in plugs, and they've got we use Vermont Compost Fort V. It's a high potent mix. And so crops often have all the nutrients they need in that little plug, especially these crops that are like these went in probably 2-3 weeks before this picture was taken. They really take off as soon as they're transplanted here. And so these are edamame soybeans. Here I'm transplanting some green beans, and I'm getting these out before I could have expected these crops to germinate transplanted by hand. And so I can answer that question, when do customers want green beans? Well, they want them before everyone else has green beans. And this lets us get them to market 3-4 weeks ahead. And here their green beans this is April 1, green beans going into a greenhouse. And just today we got our first harvest off of here. And here's a plot. Most crops in here were paper potted. Some more pictures, some radish, paper pot green onions. And I'm going to go over the Muri waste here because I told you it's my favorite type. And essentially, at the end of every year, we ask, when did we hurt the most? And then we, in the winters, undertake what we call a Muri project. In other words, a project to eliminate some hurt. And so this winter, I was frustrated with these greens harvesters that are on the market, and so I decided to build my own. And I think I mostly use parts from an old Johnny's greens harvester here. And if you have questions, I'd be happy to tell you more. So one winter we lowered the loading table, our CSA loading table here. You notice our CSA boxes are about 4 inches lower than the bulk bins. And that just makes it just a tick easier to load the boxes. And it seems like an insignificant thing. However, all these little types of waste, when you get rid of them, they really do add up to a much slicker operation as the years go on. One winter, we said we were sick of digging carrots by hand, and so I went to an Amish machine shop, and he and I designed this implement to go behind our tractor to loosen soil and help make it easier to pull these carrots. And there's another picture of it here. The John Deere irrigator, one winter we said the hauling these garden carts around was the biggest form of backache and hurt. And so our Muri project was to go out and buy a gator. That was an easy Muri project. One winter we widened the openings of our greenhouse so we could get compost in and out easier with equipment. Okay, so we're out of time, and what I'm going to do is tell you my final thoughts. Essentially, there are two ways to farm here. There's a lean farm using flexible, low-cost equipment, and there's this other model that says use single-use, expensive machines. Think corn combines. There's workers who think versus workers who grind away. There's a high fixed cost utilization, using every square foot, versus machines and land that sit idle most of the year. There's production that's pulled by local customers. I talked about letting your customer be the engine and you being the caboose versus a product that's And it's growing because you want to grow it, and then you push it onto the global marketplace. And then there's growing smarter every year versus growing bigger every year. There's highly flexible, responsive to local demand type of farming, and then slow to change Jurassic era dinosaur type farming. And so essentially what it comes down to is efficiency via process or efficiency through scale. And for us small timers, it's usually a better option to choose process. And so there's two ways to grow your farms. Number one is constant expansion. You get bigger every year, more tractors, more land, more customers, and you know what the game is. And at some point, all businesses need new accounts. However, bigger becomes an addiction. And the second is to stay your own size, or find the right size, sustainable size that works for you and your family, and to lean up. I love small farms. I love quarter acre, eighth acre, 16th of an acre operations. You're not going to impress me by saying you have this huge farm and that you gross $500,000 a year. What you gross is irrelevant. So I'm getting off track here. So stay your size, cut out the waste, and create some free capacity through things like production control, removing wasted motion, getting rid of unneeded tools, keeping your system simple, not complex, creating smooth flow. This is cheaper, it's easier, it's a lot more fun, more sustainable, and in our case, it's been much more profitable. So, okay, that concludes my presentation. Thanks again, and I'll look forward to hearing your questions.
Thank you, Ben. That was great. Everybody, if you have questions, I just want to remind some of you joined after we started, there's a chat function just above Ben's video. You can click the chat button. You can type in a question. I'm going to be able to read that to Ben so we can answer. Actually, while we're waiting, Ben, I have a question on paper pot. Do you find that the planting depth is usually accurate? Like you don't have to do too much adjusting? Or was that something that you had to work on?
Usually I just keep it right in the middle. I think there's 5 or 6 different depth options. And the way I do my depth adjusting is by pushing or slightly lifting the handle as I'm transplanting. And it depends on how loose the ground is, and we sometimes paper pot into fairly stiff ground and sometimes fairly loose. And the trick is to not cover the crops. And I found that even if a little bit of leaf is getting some light, that crop will survive. But you don't want to throw dirt over them. And so it does take a fine touch.
Yeah. Do you usually water them in right away, or do you feel like you have a little bit of a window?
Yeah, the thing I do is I have old cafeteria trays, and I use those to bottom water, like an hour or two before I transplant. And so those plugs are like sopping wet going in. And I find that helps. And then I use the same practices as with traditional transplanting. In other words, I like to transplant into soil that is slightly moist, and to do it in the evenings or early mornings. And then I do try to get some water on it within a couple hours.
Thank you. We've got a question from Eric. Can you talk more about your cover cropping techniques? Do you still use any cover crop? And if not, how do you protect your unused soil in the winter?
Okay, yeah, the answer is I'm a little embarrassed to say that no, I don't use any cover crops. We've just eliminated that system, in part because we have such a small farm and I want this high fixed cost utilization. I want to be using every square inch. And I'm an impatient person, and it's just, too much for my personality to sit and watch cover crops for half the year. And so what we do in the winter is I plant a lot of garlic. I find that holds the ground well. And we do use some tarps just over the crops I want to get in the very earliest in the spring. And then we have this thick compost, which I went to a seminar on compost as a compost guru down in Indianapolis, and he gave a very compelling demonstration that the thicker your more organic matter you have, the better your soil is going to hold over the winter. Your absorption rate is much higher. and your runoff is much lower. And so, and for much of our land that we don't have anything in, it just sits idle. And usually that's just a couple of months. We'll have crops, until at least Thanksgiving or beyond, and then it will begin seeding in probably February, or as soon as we can, as soon as we can get out.
Great. We've just got a question. What type of crates do you use for harvesting and collecting tomatoes?
It depends on the type of tomato. For the red beefsteak tomatoes, we fill those into 5-gallon buckets, because you can slug buckets around fairly efficiently. And I found that 5 gallons, it doesn't deform our tomatoes. And then for the heirloom tomatoes, I don't like those to be more than 1 or 1.5 layers, because the weight of those tomatoes can deform other tomatoes. And what we're doing is using those bulb crates. And then I went to a butcher shop, and I got a roll of butcher paper that is the same width as our bulb crates. And so when we harvest, we'll put a layer of butcher paper, or it's a wax type of paper in the bottom of those crates.
And then a follow-up question on the tomatoes: are you heating your greenhouses for your early season crop? And heating cost offset by the price you receive?
No, the heating costs would not if we were just growing tomatoes. However, what we do is, as we're talking, I'll maybe go back and show you, find one of these pictures I skipped over here. We grow tomatoes and everything else all winter. And what I do is, here we are, between the rows of tomatoes, like there's some Hockerite turnips. This is maybe a picture in February or March. And here's a picture of some head lettuce, Solanova type lettuce, and we'll grow beets and onions and all kinds of things between the rows of tomatoes. And my goal is for these intercrop plants to pay for the heat. And most years that is the case. That does happen, and that was the case this year. If it's a real cold winter, it won't. But I don't like to pay for heat. I want my vegetables to pay for the heat.
And then a different question from Tony: how important was the consulting to help you get started in the process of becoming lean? And in retrospect, could you have done it if you tried to do it alone without a consultant?
I think it'd have been really hard to do it alone, because it's a lot to learn, and it helps to have a third party kind of motivate you. And that's the reason I wrote The Lean Farm, because there are a lot of good resources on lean production. My favorite is a book called Lean Thinking. However, these are pretty weighty, pretty academic texts. They're several hundred pages long, the kind of stuff I love to read in the winters. However, it's a lot to chew. And so I tried to condense it all and put it into this book, The Lean Farm. The consultant we had wasn't really a consultant. He was one of our CSA customers who runs an aluminum trailer company. And he uses this lean system in his factory. And he came to us and offered to watch us work. And he came out for 3 or 4 work sessions. And we just had informal conversations about some of these 10 types of waste and where were some of these wastes creeping in. And it just helped to have maybe a conversation partner to help us be honest, because it takes honesty, because it's easy to, I found it's easy to be dishonest, to say, well, no, we need to do this, or no, this is really an activity that adds value, and in reality it isn't.
I guess I have one question.
Mm-hmm.
If we're all listening to this now, and we're kind of in a part of the season where it seems like you've pushed the snowball off the cliff and you're just chasing it down the hill, and you kind of have things.
Yeah.
It's a hard time of year to reinvent systems or change the way things are going. What are some small pieces of this that don't take a lot of time to apply, but can really make a difference in kind of starting a transition to trying to lean a farm?
Yeah, that's a really good question. You could, I don't know, there are different ways of, overproduction waste is the most insidious, like I mentioned, so I think that might be one to tackle. I visited a farm not too long ago where their practice was on market day, they would go out and harvest everything they had and then spend an hour or two on the phone and try to find customers. And what you could do is just reverse that process. Try to find as many customers beforehand as you can, and then go out and harvest. And if you have a beautiful bed of heads that don't have customers, just till them in, and it's or find a place to donate those heads to. However, really get your customer, get your market lined up, and then go out and do your harvest. And so I wonder if I have a slide here, are ways of doing projections. You'll excuse me here for flipping through these. There are ways of doing projections. No, I don't have it. Okay. Anyhow, there are ways of projecting. What you can do is at the end of every farmer's market, I have whoever does the market send me a very quick text that just tells me what was left over after market. And before going to market, whoever goes to market makes note of what is going to market. And these steps just take about 5 minutes. However, it's a very simple way to track exactly what it sells at market. And so the next market will send the number of items we project are going to sell based on what it's sold at the previous market. And so it's less of a shotgun approach. It's more precise and more controlled. And so essentially you don't want to be moving products that aren't going to sell. And the more precise, it's okay to take 5 or 10% extra market. However, if you're coming home with 30, 40% that you cook in market, then I would recommend spending a few minutes to tighten up your tracking system.
Thank you. One more question. When you're, when you're constantly refilling beds, as soon as you're done harvesting, you plant something else. Mm-hmm. How are you tracking crop rotation, or are you tracking?
Yeah, I'm basically not. And again, I know it's kind of heretical to say, I really don't keep track of crop rotating. And I think where a farm is small enough and we grow a wide enough variety of crops that things get moved around enough that I haven't seen problems related to a lack of crop rotation. And again, we have this unique amount of organic matter in 8 to 12 inches of compost, and so there's a lot of fertility in there. And often I'll plant, like I planted fennel on top of fennel on top of fennel last year. I did 3 plantings in the same location just because that's what was available at the time, and they all turned out fine. And I suppose there would be a limit. I do try to move things around, I'll put it that way. It's just not in a controlled manner.
Do you apply that much compost every year as a follow-up question?
No, that's probably once every 6 years. Those photos I showed of that process of where we had a truck deliver a bunch of chunky compost was a plot that I had composted 6 years ago. And so, that particular area needed it. And so I'd say on average once every 5 or 6 years. However, year to year, I manage fertility with compost only. And so if we notice, for instance, and what we'll do is watch the crops. And so if the spinach leaves are starting to turn yellow, for instance, we'll throw a little bit of high nitrogen compost on there for the next crop going in if that's a heavy feeding type of crop. And so often we won't do anything. We won't add any compost because that's not needed. But if the crop coming out showed some signs of distress, then I'm going to add maybe an inch, maybe 2 inches max, but often just an inch or less of compost. And I should say we have just 2 types too. We have a vegetable-based compost, meaning grass and leaf clippings and green leafy things. And then we have an animal manure-based compost, which is going to be a higher nitrogen compost that we wouldn't use so much, for instance, when tomatoes go in. However, we would use on kale and garlic and spinach and crops that really appreciate an extra dose of nitrogen.
And you're buying the compost in, or are you making the compost?
It's a mix, and I'm not particular with our compost. And I'm using we live in an Amish area, so there's a lot of moldy hay. there's a lot of duck farms. We get a lot of duck manure from there's an organic duck farm. We are USDA certified organic, and so I guess we have to be somewhat particular. We have to come from organic sources. And then I would get grass and leaf clipping compost, much of which we cut from pastures. And most of it, however, is trucked in, and we pay about $6 a yard, and it costs about that much for the delivery too. So probably $10 to $12 a yard by the time it's on our property.
And that's certified organic.
Yeah, we are certified organic. I mean, it's not all from. And with our inspector, it doesn't have to be all from other farms that are also certified organic, but our product is